Welcome to the case of the shifting front, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series The Consulting Detective's War. Holmes in WWI, playing in the year 1916. It is only now, with the recent declassification of certain War Office dossiers, that I am at liberty to share these extraordinary accounts of my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. During the Great War, from 1914 to 1918, his singular talents were employed in the clandestine service of His Majesty's government, combating threats far removed from the public eye, where information itself was the most potent weapon. These are chronicles from the Consulting Detective's War. Allow me to commence with an affair that sorely tested even Holmes's remarkable abilities. I shall now recount the particulars of the case of the shifting front. Chapter. The November fog, a perennial London affliction, pressed its grey face against our Baker Street windows, muffling the usual clatter of hooves and cries of street vendors. Inside, the cheerful crackle of our hearth offered a bastion of warmth and light. Holmes, pipe in hand, was immersed in some arcane chemical experiment, the acrid scent of which vied with the aroma of Mrs. Hudson's morning toast. It was into this familiar domesticity that the message arrived. A plain, unassuming envelope delivered by a breathless commissionaire, the urgency of its transit hinted at by the dampness of his greatcoat. Holmes abandoned his test tubes with an alacrity that spoke volumes. He tore open the missive, his eyes scanning the single sheet within. A frown, slight yet telling, creased his brow. His voice was a low hum, yet it cut through the quiet of the room. Curious, Watson, most curious. From our little Nightingale, I perceive, and her song is rather more complex than usual. Sherlock Holmes responded. He held the paper towards the gaslight, his gaze intense. The painted birds take flight at dawn, but their nests are built on shifting sands. A pretty metaphor, Watson, for something altogether ugly, I suspect. There is a depth here, a carefully constructed illusion hinted at, replied Sherlock Holmes. Nightingale, I queried. Mademoiselle Dubois, you mean? What trouble could she have found in a supposedly stable sector? Dr. John Watson said. He tapped the note thoughtfully. Precisely the question that demands an answer. Stable sectors, like quiet men, often conceal the most profound disturbances. I fancy a visit to Major Finch at the War Office is in order, Sherlock Holmes noted. Within the hour, we found ourselves at the War Office. We navigated its labyrinthine corridors, where the air hummed with suppressed energy. The clatter of telegraph machines provided a constant, distant punctuation to the serious, low-toned conversations we passed. Major Alistair Finch received us in an office. Despite its official austerity, the scent of stale tobacco and the palpable tension of sleepless nights hung heavy in the air. It bore the marks of long, anxious hours. Overflowing ashtrays and maps sprawling across a vast mahogany desk, marked with a multitude of colored pins. His greeting was courteous but strained. Holmes, Watson, your presence is timely. We are grappling with a most perplexing situation, Major Alistair Finch replied. He gestured towards a large-scale map of the Western Front, a finger tracing a section near Arras. The sector near Arras, Holmes, Major Finch began, his voice carefully neutral. I detected a tremor of underlying strain as he continued. It has been remarkably quiet, too quiet, some believe, responded Major Alistair Finch. Our aerial reconnaissance reports shifting trench lines, responded Major Alistair Finch. Formations appear one day, vanish the next, or change in ways that defy standard military engineering, replied Major Alistair Finch. He paused, tapping a manicured finger upon the map. The muted thrum of the city outside seemed to fade, replaced by the gravity of his words. High command is, shall we say, circumspect. The notion of such elaborate deception in a static sector, it strains credulity, answered Major Alistair Finch. They suspect faulty intelligence, perhaps even atmospheric distortions affecting the photographs. replied Major Alastair Finch. What troubles us, and what lends credence to Nightingale's warning, is the sheer ingenuity of it, if true, replied Major Alastair Finch. It suggests techniques of camouflage and rapid construction we haven't seen before, answered Major Alastair Finch. It could be an exploitation of our own assumptions about the static nature of that front, and the meticulous execution of novel methods. Major Alastair Finch replied, "If the Germans are indeed employing such tactics, and if it presages an offensive," said Major Alastair Finch. He left the dire implication unspoken. The silence in the room was heavy with it. Holmes had listened with unwavering attention, his chin resting upon his hand. He now straightened. His voice was crisp, devoid of emotion. "The Germans have ever been thorough, Major, and a quiet front is the perfect stage for a meticulous rehearsal. You have an upcoming offensive planned for this area, I presume," explained Sherlock Holmes. Finch nodded grimly. "In 3 weeks. If this is a deception, it could lead our forces into a catastrophic trap," replied Major Alastair Finch. "Then there is no time to waste on skepticism, Major. Watson and I shall depart for Eris at once. This Nightingale sings a song of considerable import, and I fancy the tune is one of deception on a grand scale," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. That evening, we returned to the familiar clutter of Baker Street. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the scent of old leather. Holmes was a whirlwind of quiet energy. He moved about the room, selecting items for a small valise. He chose his lens, a notebook, various chemical reagents in small vials, and I noted with some resignation his service revolver. I asked, already beginning to pack my own bag. The familiar physician's kit went in, alongside a few necessities. "To the front, then, Holmes," wondered Dr. John Watson. He paused, a glint of anticipation in his keen eyes. "Indeed, Watson. The game is afoot, and on a field far deadlier than the streets of London," explained Sherlock Holmes. "Tomorrow we journey to Eris. The overture is complete. It is time for the first act upon a most deadly stage," explained Sherlock Holmes. The prospect of returning to the trenches filled me with a familiar disquiet, even under Holmes's extraordinary aegis. Yet the puzzle itself was undeniably compelling. The sheer audacity of the suspected German ploy and Holmes's own infectious eagerness overlaid my unease with a sharp edge of anticipation. It was an anticipation keenly aware, however, of the profound dangers that undoubtedly lay ahead on the Western Front. Our journey from the relative quiet of Calais had been one of increasing grimness. The landscape grew more scarred, more desolate, as we neared Eris. The distant, rhythmic thudding, once a mere rumor on the wind, now resolved itself into the unmistakable voice of artillery. It was a constant, sullen counterpoint to the rattle and bump of our motor car. Finally, we were directed to a sandbagged edifice, partially sunken into the earth. A thin plume of smoke from its chimney bespoke human occupation. This, we were informed, was the forward observation post. As we alighted, the crunch of our boots on the gritty soil was a small sound. The air bit at our nostrils, sharp with the metallic tang of recent shellfire and the musty scent of damp earth. A French officer, his face etched with fatigue and an almost feverish intensity, strode out to meet us. His uniform, though impeccably kept, seemed to hang loosely upon his spare frame. His voice was crisp, with a distinct Gallic cadence. "Monsieur Holmes, Dr. Watson, I am Captain Moreau. Your arrival is most timely. The situation becomes more perplexing by the hour," responded Captain Henry Moreau. "Indeed, Captain," Holmes replied, his gaze sweeping the desolate horizon before returning to the officer. "Major Finch has apprised us of the unusual circumstances. Let us waste no time," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Moreau led us through a narrow, timber-shored passage. The scrape of our shoulders against the rough wood echoed slightly until we emerged into a surprisingly well-lit room. Powerful electric lamps cast a stark glow. The walls were covered with maps, and a large table in the center was strewn with glossy aerial photographs. The faint, acidic scent of photographic chemicals still clung to the air, mingling with the aroma of strong coffee. From somewhere nearby, a low, persistent hum emanated from some unseen apparatus, and from an adjacent chamber, the rhythmic, insistent click of a telegraph key punctuated the otherwise hushed intensity of the post. He gestured towards the table, his hand trembling slightly as he picked up a photograph. "Observe, gentlemen," Morrow said, his accent thickening with tension. "These were taken but 3 days ago. A typical, if rather quiet, section of the German line. Standard trench systems, predictable emplacements," answered Captain Henry Morrow. He then laid another photograph beside the first, its surface still faintly damp to the touch. The difference was startling, immediately apparent. Entire trench lines appeared to have shifted. New earthworks had sprung up where none existed only days before, while others had vanished as if swallowed by the churned earth. The change was not merely an extension or reinforcement of existing positions, but a wholesale, baffling transformation of the battlefield. "Good heavens!" I exclaimed, peering closer. "Such extensive alterations in so short a time seem impossible." "The sheer manpower required," Dr. John Watson inquired. "Precisely, Dr. Watson," Morrow affirmed, his voice tight with strain. "And it continues. Each new set of plates reveals further anomalies. Formations appear, disappear, relocate with a speed that defies all known military engineering. My superiors, they are inclined to believe it is some new form of rapid construction, but I fear something far more insidious," Captain Henry Morrow said. Holmes, meanwhile, had taken up a magnifying glass. He was examining the photographs with an intensity that was almost palpable, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He made no sound for several minutes. The only disturbances in the quiet room were the soft rustle of the prints as he compared one with another, and from far off, the distant, mournful sigh of a shell passing high overhead. At last he straightened, his voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. "The speed is indeed remarkable, Captain, but observe also the character of these works. In this photograph, note the sharpness of the parapets, the almost geometric precision. And here," he tapped a point on another image, "the shadows cast by these supposed gun emplacements. They are inconsistent," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Morrow leaned in, his eyes following Holmes's finger. "Furthermore," Holmes continued, his tone thoughtful, "where are the corresponding spoil heaps for such vast excavations? Where are the networks of communication trenches one would expect to service such rapidly appearing and disappearing strongpoints? These images suggest not solid earthworks, but something more ephemeral, almost theatrical." A flicker of understanding, or perhaps desperate hope, crossed Morrow's face. "Theatrical? You mean a deception, Monsieur Holmes, a grand illusion?" His voice was barely above a whisper, remarked Captain Henry Morrow. "It is a strong possibility, Captain," Holmes affirmed gravely. "A complex and daring one, designed to confuse, to mislead, perhaps to lure. These eyes in the sky," he gestured to the photographs, "show us much, but they cannot show us intent, nor can they penetrate a sufficiently clever disguise. They reveal effects, not causes," Sherlock Holmes noted. The weight of Holmes's words settled heavily upon us in the small room. If he was correct, the enemy was engaged in a deception of unprecedented scale. It was a deception that our most advanced aerial reconnaissance was utterly failing to decipher. Outside, the distant guns seemed to punctuate the strained silence, a grim reminder of the stakes involved. "What we require now, Captain," Holmes stated, his gaze distant yet focused, "is intelligence from a different vantage. We need eyes on the ground, closer than any camera can reach, to ascertain the true nature of this shifting front." I knew then that our investigation was about to take a far more perilous turn. moving from the analysis of images to the shadowy uncertainties of no man's land and its informants. The Nightingale's warning echoed in my mind, and I sensed that her perilous whispers would soon be our most crucial guide. Captain Moreau's aerial photographs preyed heavily upon my mind. The German lines they showed shifted bafflingly. We approached the Café de la Victoire, a small, rather battered establishment in a village huddled perilously close to the front. A chilling wind whipped down the narrow street. It carried the faint, acrid tang of shellfire, and I regret to say, the unmistakable odor of decay. Distant artillery thudded with a grim rhythm war's unceasing heartbeat, growing more insistent as we neared our rendezvous. Mademoiselle Dubois, Watson, Holmes remarked, his voice low against the wind that rattled the cafe's ill-fitting window frames. She comes highly recommended for courage. Yet information from such proximity is often colored by the shadows it's gathered in. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The door groaned ajar. Inside, thick gloom filled the space, broken only by slivers of grey light from shell holes above. A woman rose from a shadowy corner, Nightingale. Though pale-faced, her eyes were remarkably steady. A chill permeated the air, and a faint scuttling suggested unwelcome inhabitants. "Monsieur Holmes, Dr. Watson," her quiet voice held surprising firmness. "You came. The activity, it is most peculiar," answered Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale. "Peculiar how, Mademoiselle?" Holmes inquired, his gaze keen. Moreau spoke of shifting trenches, vanishing artillery. "What do your ground sources report?" Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Mademoiselle Dubois drew a deep breath, the sound nearly lost to the wind that whistled through a crack in one of the boarded-up windows. She spoke of strange nocturnal movements, of muffled sounds of construction where none was expected, and of German patrols that showed an unnerving, almost brazen confidence. The few other patrons in the cafe, mostly weary-looking locals nursing small glasses of thin wine, kept their heads down, pretending not to listen, though the tension was palpable. "Men hear things, see shadows," she continued, her voice tinged with fatigue yet resolute. "Some say a great push, others a feigned retreat. Many rumors are fear-born, but these sudden, inexplicable changes are consistent. That troubles me. It feels orchestrated." Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale, answered. Holmes, naturally, listened with his singular intensity, his fingers steepled, his keen eyes fixed unwavering upon her. Her hushed words, spoken across the worn wooden table, were accompanied by the occasional clink of a cup from the proprietor behind his makeshift counter, the steady drip of water from a damaged section of the ceiling, and the sporadic crack of distant rifle fire. A grim counterpoint to our clandestine meeting in this public, yet strangely isolated, space. "Orchestrated indeed," Holmes murmured, meeting her gaze. "You fear a trap, rightly so. Yet these rapidly changing dispositions, guns seen one day, gone the next, suggest something else. They speak less of conventional assault and more of a performance," declared Sherlock Holmes. I confess, Holmes's theatrical analogy in such grim circumstances took me aback. "A performance, Holmes?" I asked, my voice betraying my bewilderment. "To what end, amidst such brutality?" responded Dr. John Watson. My protest hung in the cold air. Holmes, however, seemed unfazed by my conventional view. "To deceive, Watson," Holmes replied, his tone sharpening slightly. "They want to make us look one way while true danger lies elsewhere. Or they aim to lure us into a prepared killing ground. Battlefield rumors are unreliable. Yet a pattern emerges from that noise. It is not a pattern of strength, but of deliberate illusion. They want us to believe they move illogically. This is to confuse us and sow doubt." Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Mademoiselle Dubois nodded gravely. Her informants were brave souls from nearby villages. They spoke of supply trains that seemed to vanish into thin air. They also mentioned inexplicable lights appearing on supposedly unoccupied ridges. These hushed, earnest accounts detailed events bordering on the unbelievable. They only deepened the perplexing enigma we faced. "There is one man," Mademoiselle Dubois said then, her voice dropping lower. "Unconventional. Some find him unsettling. He speaks of this not as warfare, but a grand stage play. He sees things others miss." Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale, replied. I saw a distinct flicker of interest light Holmes's eyes at this. I had often heard him lament how the conventional military mind struggled when faced with truly original deception. As we prepared to leave, the damp chill of the poorly heated cafe seemed to cling to our clothes. Outside the cafe's entrance, the setting sun cast long, distorted shadows down the village street, painting the desolate landscape beyond in hues of orange and purple. "This man, mademoiselle," Holmes stated at the threshold, wind tugging his coat. "This stage play observer, I must speak with him. An expert in illusion may be precisely what's needed to pierce this veil," explained Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's suspicions, voiced after our meeting with Mademoiselle Dubois, hung heavy in the air. The tension was palpable, undispelled even by the chill of the French countryside. He believed we were not merely observing German military preparations, but rather the unfolding of an elaborate, deceptive performance. To this end, Nightingale had arranged for us to meet one of her most unusual informants, a man codenamed Jacques. She led us, under the cloak of a gathering dusk, to the spectral ruin of a provincial playhouse. Wind moaned through shattered panes. The scent of damp plaster and decay assailed my nostrils. Our footsteps echoed on warped floorboards as we passed through the derelict foyer. "He prefers unconventional meeting places. He says the atmosphere aids his perspective," responded Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale. Mademoiselle Dubois offered this explanation, her voice low against the sighing wind. We found Jacques backstage, amidst forgotten props and scenery. A single, sputtering oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows, turning draped cloths into waiting specters. He was a man of indeterminate age, his face mobile and expressive, his eyes missing nothing, much like Holmes's, yet with a showman's glitter. An abandoned theatre, a fitting locale, perhaps, for one who understands the art of illusion, declared Sherlock Holmes. Holmes remarked, his gaze sweeping the cavernous, dust-filled space. Jacques inclined his head, a wry smile on his lips. "Indeed, monsieur, the world is but a grand stage, is it not? And men and women merely players, some more skilled in their roles than others." Jacques, codename, replied. His voice was resonant, accustomed to filling far larger spaces than this cramped backstage corner. Holmes wasted no time on pleasantries. "Mademoiselle Dubois informs us you possess a unique understanding of large-scale deceptions, not the petty confidence tricks of the street, but grand illusions designed to mislead many," stated Sherlock Holmes. Jacques leaned against a stack of faded flats depicting a bucolic scene, the paint cracked and peeling. "Ah, the art of misdirection on a grand scale, Monsieur Holmes. It's all about controlling the audience's perception, guiding their focus, making them believe what you wish, even when the truth lies hidden in plain sight." Jacques, codename, said. He mused, his eyes alight with professional interest. "I confess, I struggled to see the immediate relevance to trench warfare, but Holmes was clearly captivated, his lean face intent. Consider, then, these aerial photographs. They show fortifications, gun emplacements, trench systems that appear, then vanish, or shift with impossible speed. Military minds are baffled. They speak of Herculean efforts, of manpower beyond reckoning," replied Sherlock Holmes. Holmes pressed him, his tone urgent. "Or they speak of an audience utterly fooled. Tell me, monsieur, on a stage, how does one create a castle, a forest, an entire army, where moments before there was nothing?" remarked Jacques, codename. Jacques countered softly, tapping his temple. He paused, his question hanging in the musty air. "Not always with stone and timber, sir. often with canvas, cleverly painted flats, and forced perspective that deceives the eye into seeing depth and solidity where there is little. Structures can be swiftly erected and struck by a trained crew. Lights and shadows are our greatest allies, creating substance from ephemera, said Jack, codename. A shiver ran down my spine, despite the relative stillness of the air within the theater. The distant, muffled thud of artillery, a constant reminder of the front, seemed to underscore his words. So, what the eye perceives from above as a formidable redoubt might be little more than painted canvas, stretched over light frames, designed to cast a convincing shadow, Sherlock Holmes said. Holmes mused, his voice sharp with dawning comprehension. Precisely, and moved overnight, or even in hours, by a comparatively small number of men. The key is to manage the audience's focus. If they expect to see a fortress, their minds will help complete the illusion. If reconnaissance flights are predictable, one can prepare the set accordingly, replied Jacques, codename. Holmes stood for a moment in profound silence, his brow furrowed. The magician's words had struck a resonant chord, offering a framework for the baffling inconsistencies that plagued us. The shifting German front, not a miracle of engineering perhaps, but a masterpiece of stagecraft. You have given me a great deal to consider, Jacques, a very great deal. The principles of the stage, applied to the theater of war, ingenious and diabolical, explained Sherlock Holmes. Holmes spoke at length, his voice imbued with a new energy. As we took our leave of the shadowy theater, stepping back into the encroaching night, Holmes was unusually quiet. I knew that look, however, the expression he wore when disparate puzzle pieces began to coalesce. The magician's insight had provided a crucial lens. I had little doubt Holmes was already eager to re-examine the aerial photographs, searching not for solid structures, but for the subtle telltales of the grand illusionist's craft. The analysis room in the observation post was dim, the air sharp with developing chemicals and the dry scent of paper. A powerful electric lamp threw a brilliant circle of light onto the large table where Sherlock Holmes was utterly absorbed. Allied photography experts stood by, their faces showing curiosity and apprehension. Captain Moreau, features taut, leaned beside Holmes, his gaze fixed on the aerial photographs. The silence was punctuated only by the faint, intermittent crackle of a wireless from an adjoining chamber, the distant, muffled thud of artillery, and the soft rustle of Holmes's fingers on the glossy plates under the intense beam. Time seemed to stretch endlessly in that hushed room. Holmes hunched over the photographs, his eyes sharp as steel, probing every detail. The magnifying lens in his hand moved methodically, revealing a landscape torn by war, the German lines carved into the earth like wounds. As Holmes's concentration intensified, the silence grew thick, almost suffocating. In that stillness, one could almost sense the rapid workings of his brilliant mind, analyzing, connecting, deducing. Suddenly, Holmes exhaled, a low sound that cut the stillness like a blade. He straightened, his finger resting on a point in one photograph, then moving to another taken, as I knew, hours later on a different day. Captain Moreau, you have confirmed the precise chronometry of these exposures, Sherlock Holmes noted. We, to the minute, Monsieur Holmes. Our pilots, they are most meticulous, Captain Henry Moreau said. Holmes nodded, his gaze unwavering from the images. He selected a third photograph, his movements economical and precise. The scratch of his fingernail across the photographic paper was unnaturally loud in the quiet. Now observe closely. These shadows tell a curious tale. In this first image, the sun casts long shadows from the fortifications. Here, in the second, with the sun higher, they shorten as one would expect. But look closely at their edges, their very character. And in this third image, taken on another day entirely, the shadows betray something most peculiar. They do not behave as shadows cast by immovable structures of earth and timber should. Sherlock Holmes noted. A low murmur ran through the experts. Morrow peered intently, his brow furrowed. I too strained my eyes, trying to see the minute discrepancies Holmes's sharper vision had detected. He indicated variations in shadow length and angle that defied the sun's consistent geometry on fixed objects. Inconsistent, but how can this be, monsieur? The structures themselves, they appear unchanged. The earthworks, the gun emplacements, they are most clearly defined, are they not? Responded Captain Henry Morrow. Precisely, Captain. The structures appear unchanged. Yet the light does not lie. These shadows behave as if the objects casting them are not what they seem, or perhaps are not entirely stationary. It is as if we are observing a grand piece of stagecraft, a meticulously constructed illusion designed to deceive the distant eye in the sky. Our friend Jacques spoke of such principles, did he not, Watson? Illusions of solidity, rapidly altered, deduced Sherlock Holmes. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The concept was audacious, almost unthinkable in its scale and complexity. Mobile fortifications designed to shift and mislead, to present a false front. You mean to say, Holmes, I began, that these trenches, these batteries, they could be largely fabricated, moved, remarked Dr. John Watson. Holmes rose from the table, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. The evidence of the shadows is compelling, Watson. It suggests a level of artifice we have scarcely imagined. This is no mere battlefield engineering. It is a masterpiece of deception. The inconsistencies are too patterned, too deliberate to be accidental. We are dealing with an enemy who understands the theater of war in its most literal sense, remarked Sherlock Holmes. He paced a short measure, the floorboards creaking faintly under his tread. The experts exchanged uneasy glances. The very foundation of their photographic intelligence seemed to tremble. This theory must be presented to those in command. Major Finch must be appraised of this potential for a colossal German misdirection. The implications are profound. The chill of the preceding night's vigil still clung to us as we ducked into Major Alistair Finch's field office. The cramped dugout, carved from the very earth near Eris, seemed to close in around us. The air within was thick with the smell of damp canvas, tobacco, and the faint, metallic tang of expended gunpowder that seemed to permeate everything at the front. A lone lamp cast flickering shadows upon maps pinned to the rough-hewn timber walls, and the rhythmic, insistent clatter of a distant telegraph machine tapped out its relentless message, a constant, unnerving undertone to our presence. Major Finch, a man whose face bore the deep lines of responsibility and insufficient sleep, regarded Holmes with a look of polite, if weary, inquiry. Captain Morrow stood beside him, his posture taut, his gaze fixed upon my companion. I had noted Captain Morrow on previous occasions, a younger officer than Finch, with a keen, analytical glint in his eyes that suggested a mind open to the unorthodox, perhaps even chafing under the rigid confines of conventional military thought. His voice cut through the low thrum of the office, clear and precise as ever. Major Finch, the aerial photographs you so kindly provided, coupled with Mademoiselle Dubois' ground reports, point to a conclusion of a most unusual, indeed, a most audacious nature, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Holmes then proceeded, with methodical clarity, to lay bare his theory. He spoke first of the shifting trench lines, the phantom artillery emplacements that appeared and vanished with bewildering speed. A map lay spread on the rough table between them, and Holmes's finger would occasionally tap a point of interest, his voice a calm counterpoint to the gravity of his words. The only other sound was the incessant tap-tap-tap of the telegraph from the outer office, a metallic heartbeat in the strained quiet. Then he moved to the crux of his argument, the minute discrepancies in shadow lengths and angles, details that betrayed not solid earthworks, but something far more ephemeral. These are not fortifications in any conventional sense, Major. They are, I submit, elaborate stagecraft. Mobile scenery designed to deceive your reconnaissance, to draw your forces into a meticulously prepared killing ground, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Major Finch listened, his brow furrowing deeper with each word. A pencil he'd been holding snapped softly between his fingers. When Holmes concluded, the Major slowly shook his head, a faint rasp in his voice when he finally spoke. "Mr. Holmes," Finch began, his voice a mix of respect and doubt, "your reputation precedes you, and I grant the anomalies in the photographs are perplexing. Captain Morrow has voiced similar concerns. But what you propose," he paused, shaking his head. "It strains credulity," answered Major Alastair Finch. "Indeed, Major. The patterns, or rather the lack of consistent pattern, defy standard military engineering. It is as if the enemy marks our intelligence with these fleeting installations," responded Captain Henry Morrow. Morrow's tone was measured, yet held an undercurrent of the frustration he had clearly experienced trying to make sense of these very reports. Finch paused, rubbing his temples as if to ward off a headache. The flickering lamplight cast harsh shadows across his weary face. The sheer scale of such an undertaking, the resources, the manpower, the discipline required to erect and dismantle such illusions, repeatedly, without detection by our patrols or informants beyond what Nightingale has vaguely hinted at, answered Major Alastair Finch. His tone, though not overtly aggressive, carried the weighty skepticism of a man versed in the grim realities of trench warfare. "To what end, sir? Such a grand deception would be a monumental gamble. Are we to believe the German High Command would sanction such a theatrical display on a supposedly quiet sector, diverting men and materials that could be used for actual defenses or offensive preparations elsewhere?" replied Major Alastair Finch. "Major, if I may." Captain Morrow's voice was steady, a contrast to Finch's agitated tone. "The Germans have demonstrated a capacity for the unexpected, their gas attacks, their infiltration tactics. They do not always adhere to our traditional understanding of warfare," replied Captain Henry Morrow. "Indeed, some of Nightingale's reports, and our own patrols noting nocturnal construction sounds with no discernible morning results, have been deeply perplexing. We have logged these phantom works, Major, much to our unit's frustration, unable to reconcile them with established enemy doctrine. What Mr. Holmes suggests, however outlandish, offers a potential framework for these very inconsistencies, a logic, perhaps, to the enemy's apparent madness." Holmes inclined his head slightly towards Morrow before addressing Finch once more. "The very audacity is its shield, Major. You expect trenches of earth and steel, not canvas and wood. Your aerial scrutiny, quite understandably, is predicated on the assumption of permanence, of solid construction that takes time and considerable effort to alter," Sherlock Holmes said. Holmes paused, the faint rustle of the photographs audible as he gestured towards them, spread on the rough, lamplit table. His finger traced a line on one of the glossy prints. "But observe these plates again. The shadows here," Holmes tapped a photograph, "taken on Tuesday, indicate a parapet of some 3 feet. He selected another print, laying it beside the first. The silence in the dugout was heavy, punctuated only by Finch's strained breathing and the ever-present telegraph. By Wednesday, in this very same location, the shadow suggests either a 6-foot wall or that the sun has inexplicably shifted its diurnal course by several hours. The latter being an astronomical impossibility, we are left with the former," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Morrow leaned closer, his expression one of intense concentration, his gaze darting between the photographs and Holmes's face. I sensed in him not just intellectual curiosity, but the dawning recognition of a puzzle piece he himself had been turning over in his mind, now finding its place. Finch, meanwhile, merely stared at the evidence, his skepticism warring with the undeniable logic. "Ergo, they are not earthworks," replied Sherlock Holmes. The major ran a hand over his face, the sound a dry whisper in the strained quiet. The canvas walls of the dugout seemed to press in, amplifying the distant, sporadic thud of far-off artillery, a grim reminder of the stakes. A fascinating deduction, Mr. Holmes, ingenious even. But the implications, if you are correct, our entire intelligence assessment of this sector is compromised. The upcoming offensive, he paused, his voice heavy with concern. It would be marching into a perfectly laid trap, predicated on a lie of unprecedented sophistication. Major Alastair Finch answered. But surely, Major, I interjected, if Holmes's theory holds, there must be some way to gain more definitive proof. Dr. John Watson replied. Holmes's gaze met mine, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Indeed, Watson, the shadows have told their tale from afar. It appears a closer look, under less forgiving light than the sun, is now required, explained Sherlock Holmes. A perilous undertaking, Mr. Holmes, yet if your theory holds even a fraction of truth, it is a risk we must consider. To proceed with the offensive, blind to such a deception, would be catastrophic, answered Captain Henry Morrow. Morrow's words, though sober, carried a note of conviction, a willingness to face the grim possibilities Holmes had unveiled. He looked from Holmes to Major Finch, his expression serious. He then turned his steady gaze back to Major Finch, his expression hardening with resolve. Your skepticism, Major, is well-founded from a conventional military perspective. Such a deception relies entirely on its novelty, its sheer effrontery. But the enemy is cunning, and we must be prepared to meet that cunning with acute observation, however perilous the task, explained Sherlock Holmes. Finch nodded slowly, the lines on his face etched deeper than before. The distant telegraph seemed to falter for a moment, then resumed its tireless rhythm. The air was thick with unspoken anxieties, the challenge laid bare. It was clear that photographs and deductions alone, however brilliant, would not suffice to shift the weight of military doctrine. More tangible evidence was imperative, and the path to acquiring it, I suspected, would be fraught with danger. The air in our modest billet hung heavy with Major Finch's lingering skepticism. Holmes, however, seemed energized, his mind already leaping towards the perilous next step. Night was our only ally, a cloak for truth. Through cracks in the boarded window, a damp chill entered, carrying the winds low, keening sigh from the desolate fields beyond, underscoring the tension. The Major requires more than theory, Watson. He requires the tangible. Tonight, we shall endeavor to provide it, though the price of admission to this particular theater is, I concede, somewhat steep, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's voice was low, yet held a steely resolve. Our guide for this nocturnal venture, Jacques, one of Mademoiselle Dubois' most trusted agents, arrived as silently as smoke. His movements were fluid, economical, a stark contrast to our more soldierly tread. Beneath a worn cap, his shadowed face was lean, alert. As we left our lines, the ground became a treacherous mire. The silence was heavy, broken only by the squelch of our boots in the mud, each step an unnerving announcement. Far off, a field gun coughed sporadically. Closer, unseen creatures rustled in the darkness, their tiny noises sharp in the stillness. We approach the listening posts now, messieurs. From here, absolute silence, said Jacques, codename. His whisper was like the dry rasp of leaves, barely disturbing the air. Follow my steps precisely. The earth remembers carelessness. Jacques, codename said. We crawled agonizingly slow, the damp earth chilling us to the bone. Jacques led us to a shallow, disused trench perilously close to the German lines. The air itself seemed to thrum with tension. Then, through the inky blackness, I perceived movement. Not the steady work of true fortifications, but something more ephemeral. Vague shapes resolved into men, German soldiers, identifiable by their helmets. They moved with a curious, almost theatrical precision. They were not digging. Instead, they shifted large, flat objects. I strained my eyes and discerned vast sheets of canvas, stretched taut over light wooden frames, being maneuvered into place. The silence was punctuated not by the clang of shovels on stone, nor the thud of heavy timbers. Instead, only muffled sounds reached us, men working with lighter materials, a subtle scraping of wood, the faint rustle of canvas. Observe, Watson, not breastworks but theatrical flats. A deadly stage set, just as I suspected, remarked Sherlock Holmes. He breathed this beside me, his voice a mere current of air, yet I detected a grim satisfaction. My heart hammered against my ribs, the audacity was breathtaking. As we watched, a flare suddenly hissed upwards from enemy lines, arcing high and casting a brief, ghastly illumination. We flattened ourselves. In that fleeting, stark light, the painted canvas stood revealed, a crude but effective imitation of newly dug earth and timber. Then a new sound cut through the night, chilling us. The crunch of approaching footsteps, heavier this time. A low murmur of German voices followed. A patrol. Quickly this way, Jacques, codename, replied. His voice, though still a whisper, was sharp with urgency. Jacques, with astonishing agility, guided us back through interconnected shell craters. The sounds of the patrol, their boots on the rough ground, their muted voices, grew fainter behind us. The pounding in my ears slowly subsided, replaced by the chilling realization of our narrow escape. Yet, amidst the fear, elation surged. We had seen it. The phantom front, the shifting scenery of this deadly play. Our observations are invaluable, but Finch will demand more than our testimony of shadows and whispers. He will require proof that can be measured, weighed, stated Sherlock Holmes. He spoke thoughtfully as we finally reached a modicum of safety, the distant rumble of artillery a reminder of our proximity to danger. His mind was already racing. I understood. Our visual confirmation was monumental. Yet, to sway the military command's deep skepticism, we needed something more concrete. The key, Holmes implied, lay in the very ground these illusions stood upon, or rather, did not stand upon. The soil itself, he suggested, must tell its tale. The night's revelations, profound as they were but a prelude to unearthing a deeper, more tangible truth. The dawn following our perilous night with Jacques was grey and heavy, reflecting the weight of the German mystery. The wind, still carrying a faint chill from the early hours, whistled a mournful tune around the eaves of our temporary billet near Arras. Holmes, however, was a man with a singular, almost feverish energy. He had paced for a good hour, the rhythmic tap of his boots on the bare floorboards a counterpoint to the distant, sporadic growl of artillery, before halting abruptly. Watson, last night's observations, though invaluable, are only one part of the puzzle. The canvas and frames suggest a theatrical display, but a play needs a stage. And that stage, if our German friends are as thorough as I suspect, must show signs of being built, or more importantly, a lack of such signs. We need expertise beyond our own. I have telegraphed the Damascus Bureau. We need Dr. Pendleton, Sherlock Holmes responded. I confess, the name meant little to me then. But Holmes spoke with such assurance that I knew this Pendleton must be a man of considerable, specialized talents. Soon, a motor car, sputtering and rattling over the uneven track, announced an arrival. From it emerged Dr. Pendleton, a remarkable figure. His spectacles seemed to magnify an already intense curiosity, and his tweed suit looked oddly neat amidst the mud and military disorder. Two assistants accompanied him, carefully carrying polished wooden cases and metal canisters, much like priests bearing sacred relics. The click of latches and the gentle clink of glass from within hinted at the delicate instruments inside. Mr. Holmes, what a pleasure! Your summons spoke of soil anomalies, fascinating. I trust my portable earth analysis laboratory is precisely what we need. Dr. Pendleton answered. Our journey to the collection sites was tense. We traveled in a commandeered lorry, its engine groaning, towards the edge of our lines. Photographic intelligence suggested furious, recent digging in these areas. The air grew thick with the metallic smell of cordite. The occasional thud of shells landing miles away was a grim reminder of our closeness to the battle. Holmes, Pendleton, and I, with a small military escort, got out near some shallow depressions and freshly turned earth. To an untrained eye, it certainly looked like the beginnings of trench works. The wind sighed through the coarse grass, carrying the faint, unsettling scent of churned soil and perhaps something chemical from the distant shelling. Here, doctor, and here. We require samples from these specific locations where the enemy's efforts appear most concentrated, yet where our friend Jacques reported only superficial activity. Sherlock Holmes said. Dr. Pendleton, with cheerful quickness, directed his assistants. They set down their equipment. What looked like simple boxes unfolded into a surprisingly complex set of instruments. Beakers glinted, spirit lamps were lit with a soft hiss, and a curious, hand-cranked centrifuge began to whir. Pendleton himself put on fine leather gloves. He carefully collected soil into labeled glass vials, his movements precise and efficient. For a while, the only sounds were the scrape of his trowel, his quiet instructions to his assistants, and the constant, mournful sigh of the wind across the desolate landscape. Extraordinary. The soil layers are peculiar, very little deep disturbance. The rich topsoil is almost entirely intact beneath the loose earth on the surface, replied Dr. Pendleton. I watched, fascinated, as Pendleton performed a series of rapid tests. He treated tiny amounts of soil with different chemicals, observing the reactions with hawk-like intensity. He scribbled notes in a small, leather-bound book, his pencil flying across the page. The smell of damp earth mixed with the sharper, cleaner odors from his chemical kit. The entire operation had a quiet efficiency, a small bubble of intense scientific work in the midst of war's brutal chaos. And the conclusion, Doctor, be precise, if you please. Does this earth speak of deep entrenchment, of fortifications built to withstand a siege? Remarked Sherlock Holmes. Mr. Holmes, the conclusion is clear. Despite how it looks, despite the freshly turned surface, the soil here has seen remarkably little deep disturbance. We see signs of scraping, of shallow work, yes. But is there evidence of the extensive, deep digging needed for strong trench systems or artillery positions? There is almost none. The earth tells a story of surface meddling, not of deep, solid construction. Dr. Pendleton replied. A thin smile touched Holmes's lips. He glanced at me, a spark of triumph in his keen grey eyes. The wind seemed to carry Pendleton's words across the scarred fields, a quiet statement with profound meaning. The canvas sheets, the wooden frames, Jacques' observations, they all began to fit together around this central, undeniable fact. Precisely as I suspected, the Germans are not digging in, Watson. They are painting a picture, a grand, elaborate illusion. This soil, or rather, the fact it hasn't truly been disturbed, is the artist's signature, confirming their deceptive masterpiece. Sherlock Holmes noted. The truth of it struck me with sudden force. No wonder the lines shifted with such bewildering speed. They were not lines at all, but cleverly disguised scenery. The implications were staggering. As we prepared to leave that desolate patch of earth, the distant guns seemed to rumble with a new and more sinister meaning. We now knew a secret hidden beneath the very soil of the front. Holmes had his proof, and the stage was set for him to unravel the entirety of the enemy's audacious play. The stark findings of Dr. Pendleton's soil analysis lay upon Major Finch's desk, a slender report that nonetheless carried immense weight. The air in his compact office, usually thick with the scent of pipe tobacco and official documents, was instead charged with a palpable tension. The minimal disturbance to the earth, where aerial photographs had suggested extensive new trench works, confirmed the very deception Holmes had suspected. A low, persistent drizzle drummed against the window pane, a mournful accompaniment to our grave deliberations. His voice was tight, a mixture of grudging respect and profound unease. "Minimal disturbance," he muttered, shaking his head. "It beggars belief, Holmes, yet the evidence from Pendleton is unequivocal." He paused, his brow furrowing deeply. "But what does it truly signify? A feint, a ruse of some minor tactical importance," answered Major Alastair Finch. Holmes, who had been gazing intently at a large-scale map pinned to the wall, turned, his eyes glinting with a familiar, keen light. "It signifies something far more audacious, Major, something that requires a broader audience. I believe the time has come to present a complete synthesis of our findings to your commanding officers," declared Sherlock Holmes. Within the hour, we found ourselves in the main Allied war room, a cavernous space where the very atmosphere hummed with strategic urgency. Maps plastered every wall, and a group of stern-faced generals and strategists were assembled around a vast central table, their hushed conversations ceasing as Major Finch ushered us in. The scrape of a chair on the polished floor was unnaturally loud in the ensuing silence. I noted the lines of strain on many faces, men burdened with the crushing responsibility of command. Holmes wasted no time. His voice, clear and precise, cut through the expectant quiet. "Gentlemen, for weeks we have been perplexed by anomalies on the Eris front. Rapidly shifting German lines, seemingly impossible feats of engineering, and intelligence from sources such as Mademoiselle Dubois Nightingale, hinting at an unprecedented level of activity, yet shrouded in ambiguity. Our informant, Jacques, a man skilled in the arts of illusion, spoke of misdirection on a grand scale," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He paused, allowing his words to settle. A low murmur of renewed skepticism rippled through some of the older officers, but Holmes's composed demeanor held their attention. He gestured towards a series of enlarged reconnaissance photographs. "These images," he continued, his tone sharpening, "show trench systems appearing and vanishing with a speed that defies conventional warfare. And now, Dr. Pendleton's soil analysis from the Damascus Bureau provides the crucial, undeniable physical proof. The ground beneath these phantom fortifications has barely been disturbed. There are no deep earthworks, gentlemen." A senior general, a man with a formidable reputation and a deeply skeptical brow, leaned forward, his medals glinting softly in the lamplight. His voice was a low growl. "Then what, pray tell, Mr. Holmes, are we seeing?" "Ghosts. Some elaborate display of theatrical props," responded Allied General. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Holmes's lips. "Theatrical props, General. In a manner of speaking, yes. Though the theater is war and the play a tragedy, should we misread the stage," stated Sherlock Holmes. "A tragedy, Holmes. Explain yourself. What kind of props could achieve such widespread deception?" Allied General answered. "Not props in the conventional theatrical sense, but something far more ingenious and deadly. The Germans are not digging extensive new trench lines. They are moving them. We are witnessing a breathtaking deception, employing prefabricated, mobile sections of fortifications designed to be rapidly deployed and repositioned," replied Sherlock Holmes. A stunned silence descended upon the room, broken only by the distant, rhythmic tick-tock of a large clock on the wall. Each beat seemed to underscore the audacity of the scheme Holmes had described. I watched as comprehension, then horror, dawned on the faces around the table. Eyes widened, jaws clenched, and a palpable tension filled the air. The implications were staggering. Finch spoke first, his voice barely a whisper, all previous skepticism erased. "Mobile fortifications, a lure. It seems impossible, yet, my God, Holmes. To draw our offensive into what, man?" "Speak plainly," remarked Major Alastair Finch. His voice was grim, yet resolute. "Precisely, Major. Into a meticulously prepared killing ground. an ambush on an unprecedented scale, orchestrated by a foe who understands the value of psychological warfare as much as artillery. They are banking on our conventional expectations, on our belief in the solidity of the earthworks we observe. This entire shifting front is an elaborate stage, set for a tragedy of our own making, should we advance blindly, replied Sherlock Holmes. The weight of his revelation settled heavily in the room. The maps on the walls, once symbols of strategic planning, now seemed to depict the outlines of a monstrous snare. The assembled commanders exchanged grim, knowing glances. The nature of the threat was now terrifyingly clear, and the air thrummed with unspoken urgency. The question was no longer what the Germans were doing, but what, in God's name, could be done to counter it. Within the Allied command center, a palpable shift had occurred. The initial incredulity and alarm following Holmes's stark revelation had crystallized into grim, focused resolve. The air itself seemed charged, thick with the scent of map paper and tobacco. A faint, metallic tang hinted at the ceaseless work of the telegraph equipment, its distant clicking a subtle undercurrent to the room's suppressed energy. Around a vast table, a colossal map lay spread, detailing our lines and the phantom German positions Holmes had exposed. Here gathered the highest military minds, their uniforms rustling softly, their occasional low murmurs the only breaks in an otherwise intense quiet. His voice was a low rumble, accustomed to command. Mr. Holmes, you have shown us the precipice. Now, sir, how do we draw back, or better yet, turn their own audacity against them? Answered General Davies. Holmes, who had been observing the intricate web of lines on the map, straightened. His eyes, bright and alert, swept across the assembled officers. A faint scrape of his shoe on the wooden floor was audible in the hush. Holmes began crisply. Gentlemen, the enemy believes their deception complete. They anticipate our conventional response. Our counter must surpass their misdirection. We shall not merely avoid their trap, we shall spring our own. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He gestured towards the map, his long finger tracing a path. They have presented us with a false front, a theater of war designed to lure us. We shall, in essence, accept their invitation, but on our terms and to a performance of our own scripting, declared Sherlock Holmes. Major Finch, his brow furrowed in concentration, spoke up, his voice carrying a note of cautious pragmatism. A counter-deception, Mr. Holmes. The resources required, the sheer complexity of coordinating such a maneuver to appear genuine to their observers, it is a formidable undertaking. Major Alistair Finch said. Indeed, Major, and it is precisely its audacity that will lend it credence. The German command, so confident in their elaborate scheme, will be predisposed to see what they expect to see. We shall feed that expectation, meticulously crafting the illusion of an impending major assault, drawing their reserves and attention precisely where we wish them to be focused, upon nothing. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A pointer stick clattered lightly against the table as another general picked it up, his gaze fixed on the map. The discussion began to flow, a current of strategic thought. Holmes often guided the conversation, his sharp observations refining suggestions and highlighting potential flaws. The room soon filled with the low thrum of earnest debate, punctuated by the decisive tap of a finger on the map, or the scrape of a chair as an officer leaned closer to press a point. His French accent lent a certain precision to his words. So, we make them believe our main thrust comes here, against their phantom army, while the true offensive, it is prepared elsewhere in utmost secrecy, General Allard said. Slowly, the core of the counter-strategy began to coalesce. It would be a meticulously prepared, yet entirely false, Allied advance. This grand deception would involve the visible massing of troops and artillery, or rather, the convincing illusion of such, concentrated in the very sector the Germans had so artfully prepared for their ambush. Precisely, General. We must become masters of the stage, creating a performance so compelling that the enemy cannot help but believe its reality. Their intelligence will report our build-up. Their reconnaissance will confirm it. Every piece of false information will reinforce their existing conviction, deduced Sherlock Holmes. As the meeting drew to a close, a new energy permeated the command center. The initial shock had given way to a steely determination, the low murmur of voices now carrying a different, more purposeful tone. Blueprints for this grand deception were already being mentally drafted. The weight of the impending operation was immense, yet a spark of the theatrical ignited the room, a sense that the enemy's cunning would be met with a finesse they could never anticipate. The first quiet orders, whispers that would set the grand illusion in motion, were already being considered. I knew the true test would lie in the flawless execution of this intricate play, a performance upon the very stage of war. A chill lingered in our forward observation post, a cramped dugout redolent of damp earth and stale tobacco. Below us, in the pre-dawn gloom, the Allied trenches buzzed with carefully planned activity. This was a stark contrast to the eerie, quiet following our intense planning sessions. The grand counter-deception was now in motion. This was Holmes's bold response to the enemy's intricate scheme. His voice, when he spoke, was low and steady, yet it carried an undercurrent of keen anticipation. Our friend, Jacques, has a unique talent, Watson. When used precisely, theatricality can be a powerful weapon in this new kind of war. Sherlock Holmes responded. Indeed, the man known only by his code name, Jacques, moved among the soldiers with a maestro's quiet confidence. I had learned he was once a celebrated stage illusionist. His skills were now repurposed for this far grimmer theater. He supervised the placement of seemingly new communication trenches. These shallow deceptions would surely catch an aerial observer's eye. He paused to address a young lieutenant. His tone was one of patient instruction. Ensure the earth from these false saps is scattered as if by many hasty hands, moan Lieutenant. It is paramount to give the impression of significant, if hurried, preparation, remarked Jacques. Further along, teams of men wrestled with large canvas shapes, stretching them over wooden frames. From our vantage point, and surely from the German lines, these would soon look like the unmistakable silhouettes of field guns and ammunition stores. The sounds were carefully managed. The rhythmic thud of mallets, the scrape of shovels, and even occasional, deliberately loud commands were all designed to carry across no man's land. It was a phantom army rising from the mud. "Observe, Watson," Holmes murmured, his gaze fixed on men arranging brushwood to simulate machine-gun nests. Jacques understands the German mind. They expect thoroughness, even in deceptions. He provides just enough sloppiness in one area to make the careful construction elsewhere seem genuine, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He elaborated, his fingers steepled before him. Their reconnaissance will report a build-up, Watson. They will see what they expect to see, what their own plans require us to do. Our task is not just to present an illusion. We must present one that confirms their biases. This will lure them deeper into their own preconceived trap. The most effective deceptions are those the enemy helps build in his own mind. As the false dawn began to break, painting the eastern sky gray and blood orange, the flurry of activity subsided. The men withdrew. They left behind a landscape artfully rearranged. We remained in the observation post, the air thick with unspoken tension. From the German lines, the only sound breaking the heavy silence was the distant, sporadic crump of unseen artillery. Every pair of eyes, every field glass, was trained on the enemy positions, searching for any sign, any reaction. A young signaller spoke into his field telephone. His voice was barely more than a whisper as he reported, "No unusual movement observed from their forward trenches, sir." "All quiet," said Allied soldiers, executing the plan. Holmes nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Patience, my dear Watson. The first act is complete. Now we await the audience's review. They will be cautious and methodical. They will verify, observed Sherlock Holmes. The waiting stretched on. Each minute felt like an eternity. The sun climbed higher. It glinted off the damp earth and the cruel wire snaking across the desolate expanse. Our carefully constructed illusion lay exposed under the morning light, a silent challenge to the unseen enemy. The success of our entire counter-offensive now hinged on their interpretation of this elaborate piece of theater. Perhaps the lives of thousands depended on it. The true test was about to begin. The air within the Allied command center remained thick with a palpable tension. Hours had passed since our countermaneuver had been set in motion, an eternity measured by the taut silence. The waiting is damnable, Holmes. Every tick of the chronometer feels like an hour, commented Dr. John Watson. Holmes merely inclined his head, his gaze fixed on the central map table. Around us, the only sounds were the dry scratch of pens on paper and the hushed, anxious murmur of staff officers. Even the distant, irregular thud of artillery, a grim lullaby to which we had all become accustomed, seemed to hold its breath. Suddenly, the canvas flap of the tent was thrust aside, and a young signals officer, his face flushed with exertion and excitement, hurried towards Major Finch. A low buzz of anticipation swept the room. He delivered his message in a rapid, breathless undertone, too low for me to catch, but the major's posture, initially rigid, visibly eased. A slow smile, one of profound relief, spread across his features. His voice, when he finally spoke to the assembled officers, was tight with controlled emotion. Gentlemen, Mademoiselle, it appears the enemy has taken the bait. Their advance has been decisively checked. Our forces met them not where they expected, but precisely where we dictated. The ambush, I am relieved to confirm, has been averted, responded Major Alastair Finch. A collective sigh, almost a gasp, rippled through the assembled officers. Later, in a quieter annex, with maps spread across a makeshift table still bearing the faint scent of damp earth and tobacco, Major Finch addressed Holmes more directly. Mademoiselle Dubois stood nearby, her expression weary but resolute, the strain of her perilous work etched around her eyes. Holmes, your unorthodox methods. Well, dash it all, man, the results speak for themselves. We owe you, and indeed Mademoiselle Dubois and her courageous informants, a considerable debt. By Jove, the sheer audacity of their deception was nearly our undoing. Holmes inclined his head, his gaze distant, as if replaying the intricate dance of wits just concluded. Their primary error, Major, lay in their overconfidence. Having constructed so elaborate a stage, they could not conceive that we might see beyond the footlights to the machinery backstage. They underestimated the power of an observant mind and the courage of those, like Jacques, who dare to walk amongst the enemy's illusions, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Mademoiselle Dubois, who had listened intently, added her perspective, her voice low yet carrying a clear, strong timbre despite the weariness etched on her face. My people, they reported the Germans were utterly bewildered. Their meticulously planned offensive, it shattered against an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. It is a small victory, perhaps, in this vast war, but it is a victory for truth. N'est-ce pas? Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois answered. As a pale dawn broke, the mournful cry of a distant bugle stirred us from our brief rest. I found myself accompanying Holmes to a field hospital, a sprawling city of canvas tents. The low hum of suffering mingled with the sharp, clean scent of carbolic, assaulting both ear and nose as we approached. A sobering sight, Holmes, even after such a meticulously planned victory, commented Dr. John Watson. Holmes nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping the grim scene. The triumph of intellect had been strategically vital, but it had not been without its cost. Rows upon rows of stretchers bore silent testament to that grim reality. He paused by the entrance to one such tent, his expression unreadable for a moment. his voice unusually subdued when he finally spoke. "Observe, Watson, the true ledger of warfare, each entry paid in human currency. Deception may shift the battlefield, but it does not negate the price," stated Sherlock Holmes. Our journey back to London was undertaken in the relative quiet of a first-class railway carriage. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels upon the track and the occasional mournful hoot of the whistle provided a familiar, almost comforting counterpoint to the grim theatre we were leaving behind. "You are unusually pensive, Holmes, even for you. The German deception, I take it, still occupies your mind," wondered Dr. John Watson. He stirred then, his gaze returning from the fleeting French countryside, though his brow remained furrowed in thought. His tone, when he finally spoke, was deeply reflective. "This war, Watson, is evolving into something altogether new. It is no longer merely a contest of arms and men, but a battle of wits, of information, of elaborate, layered deceptions. The front line is as much in the mind as it is in the mud of Flanders," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He gestured with a long, thin hand. "The psychological toll of such sustained illusion, both on those who perpetrate it and those who seek to unravel it, is immense. It demands a new kind of soldier, a new kind of strategist. Ingenuity in intelligence, the ability to discern the genuine from the feigned, will prove as decisive as any artillery barrage. We have seen but an echo of it here," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I nodded, absorbing the somber truth in his words. The case of the shifting front was closed, a victory hard won. And yet, Holmes, the echoes of its intricate deceptions, the very shadows of this great conflict, they seem to stretch far ahead, into an uncertain future, do they not? Commented Dr. John Watson. Holmes looked out at the darkening landscape, a profound weariness in his eyes that I had seldom seen. "Indeed, Watson, the ingenuity of man, it appears, is a double-edged sword, as terrible in its application to destruction as it is brilliant in its pursuit of truth," explained Sherlock Holmes. He fell silent then, and I was left to ponder his words as the train carried us homeward, the weight of that terrible brilliance and the war's grim shadow settling upon us both.